In this video, I'm going to be explaining the technique of bracketing. Bracketing is a technique that you can use when you have mostly light subjects or mostly dark subjects when you are shooting your film. Our light meter's job is to read the middle gray of the scene that it is seeing. So when you have a subject that is mostly light or mostly dark, it doesn't have that balance and the light meter can't find the middle gray. The result of that is you can end up with low contrast in your photo. So for example, this image of the tree, there's snow on the ground, there's snow on the tree, and the sky is pretty gray. On the left, you can see that the contrast is really low, but on the right, you can see that it looks more like it would in real life. When you have a mostly light subject, you need to compensate by either slowing down the shutter speed or opening up the aperture. So if your light meter is reading green at 2/50th of a second for your shutter speed, you are going to want to slow that down. You can take one exposure with the green light and then bracket by going one shutter speed down so that you can allow more light into your camera. If you want to bracket with your aperture, you are going to open up your aperture to also allow more light into your camera. You can choose one or the other. You can bracket with your shutter speed or you can bracket with your aperture. If your aperture is reading, or if your light meter is reading green at your f-stop of 4, then you're going to want to open up that aperture by also taking a picture at 2.8 or 2, depending on how light your subject is. The concept is the same if you have a mostly dark subject. For subjects that are mostly dark, you are going to want to speed up your shutter speed or take away more light. So again, if you're reading green at 2/50th of a second, then you're going to want to take one exposure at 2/50th of a second and then bump it up to 500th or 1000th of a second to make sure that you get a good exposure. Same thing with your aperture. If you want to bracket with your aperture, you are going to take a picture, say you get the green light at the f-stop of 4. You're also going to want to take one at 5.6 or 8, depending on your scene, depending on how dark your scene is. Now, the difference between bracketing with your aperture versus your shutter speed depends on the scene in front of you. So if you are more worried about your depth of field, say you want your picture to have a shallow depth of field, then you're going to want to stay at those larger apertures, f2, 2.8, 4, 5.6. Those are going to give you your shallow depth of field. But if you have a subject in front of you that is moving, say you are photographing water, and you've got dark rocks, you've got dark water, then you are going to want, if you want to freeze that movement, if you want to freeze the water, then you're going to want to bracket with your aperture, because the faster your shutter speed, the more frozen the movement is, or vice versa. If you want blurred motion, then you're going to want those slower shutter speeds, and you can bracket with your aperture so that you don't have to sacrifice the shutter speed of your photo. So that is bracketing. To review, bracketing is an important technique for when you have a scene that is mostly light or mostly dark. Think snow, that would be a scene that is mostly light. You're going to take one photo at the light meter reading, and then if your scene is light, you want to add more light, either with your shutter speed or your aperture. And if your scene is mostly dark, you want to take away light, either with your shutter speed or your aperture. This is going to ensure that you have a well-exposed photo, and it's kind of like an insurance to make sure that picture will turn out.